Okay, good morning, and thanks for joining us here at the Saturday Morning Mastermind Collective. And today's verse is going to be the verse 78 of the Tao Te Ching, and from we're studying from the book "Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life" by Dr. Wayne Dyer. Would you guys? There it is. Dan's got it holding up. Holding it. Want to go around and just introduce you guys real quick?
I'll go first. I actually forgot to mute myself, so I already unmuted. So, my name is Dan Sislik. I live here in hot Vegas, as people call it right now. I actually love this type of weather. The hotter it is, the happier I am. So, with that, looking forward to today's discussion.
All right.
Good morning. I'm Karen Lohoff. I'm in hot Chandler, Arizona. And my son is coming back in today, and he was telling me yesterday in a text message how much he's dreading it, and I just know he really is. I mean, there's nothing like trekking across the desert for 6 hours and uh, coming coming into where there's no relief. So we'll look forward to chatting with you today.
Awesome, fantastic. It seems like it's hot everywhere. It's hitting the 90s down here as well, in Florida, and Tampa, and it's not going to cool off for a while. So I can't wait till already can't wait until January. But um, yeah, so the verse this morning that we're reading is verse 78 of the Tao Te Ching. Would either one of you like to read it, or shall I?
I can.
Okay, that'd be great, Dan. Thank you.
Okay. The premise of this chapter is living like water, and the verse is, nothing in the world is softer and weaker than water. But for attacking the hard, the unyielding, nothing can surpass it. There is nothing like it. The weak overcome the strong, the soft surpasses the hard. In all the world there is no one who does not know this, but no one can master the practice. Therefore the master remains serene in the midst of sorrow. Evil cannot enter his heart, because he has given up helping. He is people's greatest help. Two words appear paradoxical.
Yeah. Hey, the first thing I actually thought of when I was reading this um, was the phrase I had heard from Bruce Lee to be like water. Right, that was the first time I'd ever even heard that analogy before, and but that did not go into very great depths. This seems to go quite deeper into the meaning of it. Um, you think of water initially as being completely weak and malleable and just able to be pushed around, but uh, those and it says even here that in all the world there's no one that does not know this. But as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, well, I really hadn't thought about it too much. I know water can be pretty powerful, living on the water and dealing with waves, and worried about floods and things like that. And I know water can cause lots of destruction, but I, they're talking about it in such a unique way here that it kind of it was escaping me, at least at first. You know, what thoughts did you all have on it?
Well, before we started, I had made a comment about basically, and I can't remember my comment now, but basically how it is, it's resistant but not resistant. And you know, we all know how, like I've seen it firsthand here in Vegas. We have our flood zones and stuff when we get, our uh, what we call our monsoon season, usually July and into August, when we'll get rain and stuff, and we'll get the flash floods, and they'll come rushing down off the mountain. And I've seen, just rivers of water, and people's cars get, uh, taken carried away, or in some of the gullies and stuff they've had over the years that they've built and made better for better channeling the water. I've seen cars get knocked into them, and people get stuck in them and swept away in them. Also known from stories like hurricanes and stuff and things like that, the force of those of what water can do, plus the inevitable. And I'm gonna go to one I'm sure we all have done, being on the high dive. We go to dive off and stuff, and we get kind of out of sorts or mistime it or whatever, and next thing we know, we do the proverbial belly flop. And we know how hard water is when you hit doing a belly flop. I mean, it hurts, you know and yet you're looking at something that just a second ago you saw it just kind of waving around, moving around, just easy going. But when you hit it, it's almost like hitting a brick wall. So in that, it's right when it says, and the other part is, I've seen for streams and mountains and stuff where for years and years and years, water has worked its way down, but then after time, it's carved its little way through the terrain, through stuff where you can tell at one point it was a big, you know, blockage and stuff. So it's interesting the power that water really has, and that um, if we can learn to master that in ourselves to be more like that, I think that's how we can help better get through life and help others get through life.
Oh, great points. Great points. I like that what you're pointing out with the belly flop. I think we've all managed to do that. If you ever tried to do a flip into the pool or something, uh, and yeah, it's like hard as pavement for a second there. But at the same time, if you as a diver, if you cup your hands right and stick them out of your hand, you can shoot right into that water with ease and barely make a splash. Just, if you know that skill, you don't have to be stopped by it. But, one thing I was thinking about as I read it was the old saying about a immovable object and an unstoppable force. And I could see, whereas where in that example, the like a mountain or something, unyielding, unmovable would, as water comes around, it just, what happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force? Well, the unstoppable force just goes around it and through it and over it, and the immovable object stays unmoved, right? Isn't affected maybe, but water is that unstoppable force, of nature, in my mind as I was reading it anyway. What do you think, Karen?
You were, or maybe it was Dan that was saying that he hadn't thought about it. I think you said you hadn't thought about it. The power of water, some of the different things that were mentioned. And I go back to, there was a time when I was looking to do something different, and I guess I should probably first mention, so you have a little bit of a better picture, but I put my first husband through law school as a Tupperware manager. So contrast selling Tupperware, schlepping in your bags into somebody's house and taking a table and a tablecloth and putting out the Tupperware and picking up the Tupperware and talking about, and I loved it to death. I loved it to death. I did it for 8 years, and somehow I reached a stopping point where I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm not saying that the water came next, but somewhere in that time period afterwards, I thought, you know what? I've heard about this company. It's been around for a long time here in Mesa, which is right next to Chandler, and they want somebody, and of course they're telling you can make $500,000 in half a day, and all that kind of stuff. So why don't I try it? So I went there, and there's a movie I wish so much that I could think of the name of it. I think it's Tin Men or something like that, and it's an old movie now, but at the time it was about selling siding, and there's a whole difference between soft cells and hard cells, and I'd never known that before. Talk about not thinking about water and all that kind of stuff. Here I am sitting in this sales class, and I mean I'd been a manager, I'd been teaching, and here they are doing these things, and I couldn't help but think of that movie, because I think one of the things that happened in that movie is, they go into this house, and at some point they drop, they drop a $20 bill, and they're kind of, standing there and moving around a little bit, and somebody says, "Oh, here's your 20. You dropped a 20." Anyway, the idea is, there's lots of subterfuge that can go on, and there's a lot of subterfuge that can go on with selling water softeners, water, all that kind of stuff. Now, maybe it's different now. I mean, it's 100 years ago that I was doing that. But the thing that I learned from those sales meetings is that water is absolutely astounding in what it can do. And of course, we were talking about pipes, and we were talking about, sinks, and we were talking about tubs, and we were talking about your whole system that you can't see behind your walls, and how you need this entire system, so that people don't have problems like that. And I didn't last long, obviously. I mean, I just could not stomach stuff. But I do remember having a healthier respect for what water can do and thinking about it. And it does take something generally to get people to really think about the power and the ability and the strength. And I mean, water's one of the elements, water, fire, metal, whatever. And just a few days ago, I was listening to a woman talking about, and she was talking about some things I'd never heard of and never thought of. But I was open-minded, and being open-minded allowed me to use my imagination to consider what she was saying. She said, we've all had hundreds of lives, reincarnated lives. And she said, we've been everything. And she says, we've been air, so that we could feel what it's like to be air. And so while you and Dan were talking, Jason, I was thinking, we've probably been water. And the interesting thing about thinking about that is that there are times when you need to pray. And I'm thinking about our flat old Phoenix. I was coming back from way across town, and it was pouring rain, and it hadn't been raining, I don't think, when I started out. So it was maybe 2 hours later, and I came to a point on Camelback Road and the avenues somewhere. And I mean, there was water totally everywhere, totally across the road. And they always warn you to not drive into that situation. And you look there and you think, hey, I know this road. I know those houses. I know the lights. I know it all. So I started out in there, and I realized I was in trouble. and I opened my door, and the water was up to the, right to where it could have come into my car. And I realized how foolish I'd been. And so when I say, sometimes you need to pray, I didn't want to ruin I had a company car. I didn't want to ruin my company car and explain, I didn't follow the guidelines. I decided I could cross the water in the road. So
There was a road here earlier, right?
so I was
That's
definitely praying, and I think sometimes it helps to realize that everything has a spirit, and it's not easy. I mean, it's not hard to imagine the things we're talking about, that water has a spirit if you ever need to pray. Okay.
I was going to jump back into something as I was looking at the chapter a little bit, and Loose Tao talks about water is as mysterious to us as the Tao is. When you reach into the river and try to squeeze it tight, you end up losing it all. And I've actually, done that, grabbed it and tried, and tried to hold it, and I open my hand and it's all gone, except that it might have a little, bit in my, hand. But then it says, water is elusive until you cease grasping and let your hand relax and be one with it. But when I put my hand in and just kind of cup it a little bit, going back to what you were saying as a diver, when they dive and put their hands out in front of them, have them a certain way to kind of cut into the water just that right way, you know, but using my hand, but not fighting with it, but just kind of becoming semi one with it. How when I lift my hand up, I can come up with a couple, handful of water that I might drink or pour in my head or something if I'm hot or something like that. And it's just interesting how, you know, the to me the oxymoron of, you know, how we are in life, how a lot of times when we resist and fight and go against things, that's how much harder it pushes against us. And, you know, we don't get to where we want to go or get where we want or whatever. And I think I'm learning a little bit more and more now that it kind of coincides with how the universe works and how God works, or however I believe God, that, when you start resisting and just learn to kind of be one with it, that's when the things start flowing and going and working, not always necessarily the way you exactly want it to, because I believe things have their path and their destination, but you actually start moving towards something rather than getting pushed back or deterred or um, turned off by it or something like that, as if you were coming up against a boulder and trying to move a boulder, and you can't move the boulder. But if you learn to find the ways around it, like water does, that's and I think that's a great way of looking at things and how to operate better in life.
Dan, you just clued me in on how Moses parted the Red Sea. When you had your hand up there and you talked about diving in and you're essentially parting the water so that you can slide in. And I just saw that picture and I thought, oh, is that cool?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because as I see two perspectives, one is being, something that can penetrate and move through the channels of life, the waters of life, and then also I think the perspective from the verse is more of like being the water, coming from the perspective of the water, and like Karen was saying, it can seem to even have its own spirit, its own, um, energies or own, mind. Kind of what it's going to do. Well, it's going to be dripping on you if you're out and if you're outside after a rainstorm. It's going to be dripping on you. But he goes into that further about how being like water can in your daily life can help you out, and the different forms of water. And it got me thinking about how how water we experience water as water because we're in that tolerance zone of temperature where water, that's the state of water. If we were living in, a frigid environment, it'd be ice. And if this earth was, this planet was too hot, well, water would only be around in the form of a water vapor, you know. Um, so there's a lot of things to be considered that way, but I mean, that's kind of like the scientific understanding, but at the same time, what he was saying is, how to be flexible like that in your life and change with change with your environment. I really liked what you said earlier in your statement, Karen, about the soft cell and how bringing this idea of being like water, being soft like water, into a practical application of sales, or maybe like in relationships as well. And he goes into speaking about that in here as well. But it also occurred to me while you're speaking about the very neat things I've been seeing, the videos I've been seeing on YouTube about how sound influences water, and they can actually get droplets of water to suspend it themselves, and it can actually manipulate the water and make it do certain things and crest into shapes and things like that. And that's goes along with my theory of how we are. I mean, we're also made of I think it's like 98% water. We're like 98% water. So as you were saying earlier, we've been water. We are water. We're, we're a big part of us is water anyhow. And, seeing those videos and how sound waves affect the atoms in water, and it even deepens my belief that we can be also affected by these vibrations of sound and positive and negative vibrations, and how we're almost like we're specifically built in order to receive and interpret those energies. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I, my gosh, my brain is just going. Oh, you probably can't hear me. Sorry. My brain is just going nuts. I'm in the process of writing a book on my 30 years having been diagnosed bipolar, and undoing it. What hopefully I can share about how you can undo it. And when you talked about the states of water, you can have a solid state, you can have a vapor state, you can have a liquid state. My favorite mentor in all the world, I've mentioned him before, is Neville Goddard. And he talks about how we can change our states. And by changing our states, we handle things differently. We can move through things differently. And I had not connected that I wanted to talk about that in my book until you mentioned that. So thank you very kindly. Appreciate that a lot. Let's see. Then you mentioned sound, and I immediately went to Dr. I have a feeling his name's not going to come up into my mind, but many of you know about the doctor in Japan that put names of states, emotional states, on water from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? If nothing else, that let us know about that. And I think how powerful words are for us. And you're mentioning, we are largely water. That's why these things can affect us and influence us so much, and we can use them as tools. How exciting.
I was going to throw out, to me, I actually saw a video where they were doing stuff with water and making it crystallize and stuff in certain forms, and they actually showed like certain types of sound or music or something were these like really destructive looking and angry and mad type water stuff cells crystallized. But then when they played certain type of music, like really, I think they were using some classicals and stuff and things like that, and very upbeat and happy is the best way I can say it. It produced some of the most beautiful visual effects that water you could see, like stars and this and that, and each one is different. That's the thing; it's different by how it's affected by the music. And I got to thinking back now as you were saying that, Jason, to me, how I'm affected. I know that certain music will set me and put me in a place where I'm just like, I just don't, want to. But other types of music will, you know, that resonates with me and puts me in a different spirit will change how I feel or how I'm thinking. And I know that music for me is a way of how I change my thoughts or change myself from bad or, negative or, things that are going on that are affecting me. So I can help change that. um, there are times when I don't, and I need to realize that because sometimes I think we as humans like being that resistant and irritable and state against something else. And later on, as we look back, we realize that didn't really help the situation, didn't make it any better. But when you can learn to adjust as water does, and bring that back to a point where, in another point in the book where it says water so soft that it can't be harmed, damaged, or destroyed, it simply returns to its source to be used over and over. And going back to what you were saying, boil it until it disappears and its vapors into the atmosphere, ultimately to return. Drink it and it returns after nourishing your body. Flute it and it will return after enough passage of time to become purified nourishment again. This is all accomplished because of the element's mutable softness. And I think if we can learn to harness that in our own lives and understand, you know, the times when we need to be that, hard force, like a hurricane or like a flood of water or something like that, in the right and appropriate times where it can ultimately do some good, but you have to use that type of force, and then other times where you have to be like the vapors, you just kind of, are out there just there, but you're not really, because vapors I don't think really interact with anything per se. It's just there and kind of in the air, just softly touching and caressing or something, so to speak, and then it becomes back to water, and then water in its form where it's the most useful and has the most. Then when we come back to our more normal state, that's when we can become the most useful and effective out there in the world. And it's just interesting. The more and more I'm understanding about some of water's aspects, how we can apply it in our life, just even from the little bit I've been seeing in this chapter.
Yeah. So if we can change, if water's state is similar to ours, and we can change our state to adapt and to meet our obstacles in the best way possible, then the key would be then to learn how to master uh, changing our states and keeping ourselves in those states when the time is right. And that's not so easy to do sometimes. But I had never really even given it too much thought. But I have been trying to master a mindset of trying to have consistency in the mindset. But when your body is under some sort of a duress or stress, or maybe you're even hungry, it's easy to forget yourself and lose that lose that serenity. and lose that ability to keep that state going. But I like what he said, even though it confused the heck out of me here in this verse. I'll go ahead and read the verse one more time, but it's towards the end that it really confused me. It's the 78th verse, the Tao Te Ching, as Dr. Wayne Dyer has rewritten it. Says, nothing in the world is softer and weaker than water, but for attacking the hard, the unyielding, nothing can surpass it. There is nothing like it. The weak overcomes the strong. The soft surpasses the hard. In all the world there is no one who does not know this, but no one can master the practice. Therefore the master remains serene in the midst of sorrow. Evil cannot enter his heart because he has given up helping. He is people's greatest help. True words appear paradoxical. And so what I was thinking, what I've come to believe, I'll just kind of cut to the chase. I was confused at first as to what he was getting at. But so let's say, we're trying to have a positive state of mind, and something comes along to destroy that state of mind and bring us into a lower level of energy. And just the thought of that being, happening to us causes us to have this reaction. Or for me, it causes me to have this reaction where then I become immalleable. Like you said earlier, where I'm very rigid, and now I'm butting heads with whatever the object is. And I think it was this last verse where it says, therefore the master remains serene in midst of sorrow. And so it's like that, when that event happens that destroys my state or takes me out of that state, then that is, from what I'm gathering, the midst of sorrow. And so in that midst of sorrow, I think he's suggesting that that's when I need to become malleable and flexible. And even in the midst of sorrow and understanding that, wow, this is something that is keeping me from being happy or keeping me from achieving what it is I'm doing, I need to, and that causes me sorrow, I need to, at that point, be more like water and be more malleable and allow myself to flow around it, and maybe even eventually lift it up, as like what you were saying before, when the floods come through and they crush over everything, they move everything, but what does it do to things like cars? I mean, it actually lifts it off the ground and buoys things up, and those things that want to be lifted up get lifted up, but those things that want to stay rigid and solid sink to the bottom. So those are all the things that were entering my mind. But that one part about the master being serene in the midst of sorrow, that a little light went on after I started to realize that's the time where I really need to be on point and be more flexible. What do you guys think?
I'm thinking of an article that I read yesterday. I was looking. Oh, you can imagine I've tried so many different keywords and just been astounded. It's just incredible to me that there's so many subjects out there that I've never touched on in my entire life that, pop up, and oh my gosh. But this gal was writing about how she was just the happiest, most optimistic, most forward-seeking, insightful, delightful individual you could ever meet. And she was in the midst of a depression, which she wasn't describing herself in the depression being that way. I was reading that, and one of the things that I've noticed, trying to catch up, I mean, I was such a seeker about learning about the illness and the different things that I could do about it when I was first diagnosed. And then, life goes on and there's a lot of other things to learn about. Going back to writing now, I'm thinking I need to catch up. And there's just a lot. Well, there's probably 2 or 3 generations of people in there with their experiences. And one of the things that I've realized that people don't understand is that if you've not experienced it yourself, being in a depression, it's like being wrapped in what's that clear? It's like being wrapped in saran wrap. If somebody were to wrap you in saran wrap, that'd be one way to get rid of you, because you wouldn't be able to breathe, you wouldn't be able to move, you wouldn't be able to, it does you no good to have read the Tao Te Ching. and I was thinking, how is she powering through this? Because one of my awarenesses is that I can slide into that situation practically, fortunately not totally, but practically without warning, and there I am, and then I'm helpless. I'm utterly helpless. It's like somebody's got their hand on my head and holding me under the water until it's over. And as I thought about her, able to write an article, for Pete's sake, in that situation, I've just been awestruck, and it was like your description of the master. When you've practiced things long enough, or you've practiced enough things long enough, you can kind of, hold your breath for a lot longer than anybody else. Or you can lie there. I mean, the last experience I had with clinical depression, I basically lay in my bed for 7 months, which is a really long time. I mean, when you think about it, who the hell would want to do that? What a lack of life to do that. And yet, if you can do it without destroying yourself further, which unfortunately I did, because your brain can still work, and you can still conjure up words that you're putting in there repetitively and ruminatively, which is destructive. But if you can be the master, you can just lie there and say, hey, someday it'll be over. Someday it'll end. Someday the sun will shine. Someday the sky will lift. Someday, it'll be different. That's in part what I'm seeing with the master, is the wisdom to know, life is change, life is up and down. And if you're down, you're going to end up at some point. So that's my share.
Well, I think after hearing what you just said, that's kind of, I think what she's learned to do is kind of channel her, for lack of a better way of saying it, her water, to know that when she's in those moments, that she's learned ways of how she can, even though she's in it, channel her direction and work through that to get her to the other side, so then she can come out on the other side back to where she wants to be. And so I think, that's part of her using her water state, so to speak, I guess, to kind of help her through the process in order to get past the, where she's at and past that state. And I think that goes back to because I know, like for me, I can usually tell when, the full moon's coming on, because I know it affects my water composition in my body, and I tend to get a little more, I don't get depressed or anything, but I tend to get a little more negative, so to speak, in my thought processes and stuff and things like that. And as I'm becoming after all my life, because dealing with this, having a mother who had lots of mental issues, and how seeing her now, I'm going back and thinking towards her. We always knew when she was going to lose it and go crazy was around a full moon. I mean, almost with no no doubt, it would happen. And as I'm seeing that in my life, but yet I try to be the most positive and try and up. And my thing is, I tend to try and be very positive with other people and lift them up and build them up. So I'm learning to now, try and stay in that more natural state for me, because when I'm in that state, I pull through a lot better. And then next thing I know, it's like, oh, the full moon's gone, and I'm starting to get back out, into my normal self. But it's learning and realizing some of our states, and when we get in those lulls, or when we get in those, great analogy, I think, stagnant little puddle of water that doesn't really have a whole lot of going on. Because we all know that when water is just kind of stagnant in a little area and doesn't really have a lot of flow or anything, what happens to it? It tends to die off. It tends to stagnate. It tends to, you know, suffocate itself and no longer exist, and it changes its composition. So in that sense, I think, that's something, how we can draw an analogy there out of life, how as long as we are fluid and continue working in that direction that we are pursuing and wanting to go, like water, even though we are here and we have this issue that we need to work through or get through, but finding the ways around it. And I think that's part of what she's done. And I think that's some of the things you've learned to do for yourself, Karen, and realizing where you are and when things are starting to get to you.
That's so true, Dan. I really appreciate you sharing that. I found that not too long, probably 5 years after I was diagnosed, I began something that in retrospect I have called for a number of years howling at the moon. And my sister said, "Do you really go howling?" She's not the only one. I guess it seems very possible that I could actually go out and howl at the moon. I say, well, I use the term, I talk about the moon because, I mean, sad to say, it probably took me a year, 18 months to realize that those times generally, not always, but generally came at the full moon. And howling, I just got screechier and screechier about whatever was going on with me. I mean, you would think I had not ever been taught any better, which isn't true in the least, but I developed a lot of really bad habits around this illness. And gosh, it must have been over 20 years that I did that. Probably every month I had a spell of at least a day or two that I was in this kinked up state of just, I mean, I remember I lived one time in a little modular home, and it was on the end of a street, kind of a major street where everybody drove up to find their street, and a lot of people walked there, of course. Well, I don't know if this is true of all modular homes, but I knew that that one, the walls were pretty thin. This was when I was in Utah. I couldn't have stood it here in Arizona, but because of the heat. But I remember one night, I mean, I just felt like I couldn't possibly feel worse than I do right now. And I went into my bathroom, which happened to be right there on that wall out there on the street. And I was just screaming until I lost my voice about how terrible my circumstances, my life, everything was. And I mean, that was just kind of representative of how badly I could experience that state. And um, I've managed, and I think largely it has to do with my opportunities like we're experiencing right now, where I have other people in my life for an hour or two, and we can talk about these things other than, surface stuff. I mean, it's nice to talk about things that are beneath the surface. And I got to a point where I realized, hey, I don't think I had a howl at the moon experience. And then it went on and on and on and on and on. A couple of months ago, I thought, I am getting irritable like that. I'm having howling at the moon experience or feelings or thoughts towards. And I thought, that's not good. What do I need to do? And, you can learn things to do, and you can practice those things to do. Uh, One thing that I knew I was getting into that slide is if I had a self thought along the lines of, you're a, cow poop. you're, you're a sheep. What do you call those? Anyway. So whenever, and that's not exactly how the thought would come out. I'm being kind. But when the thought came out like that, then I knew I need to diverge off of this path. So you can learn the warning signs. You can change, and I think it's just astounding to me that Lao Tzu strikes on all of these things. I mean, today has been so profound to me to think about all these things having to do with water. So I really thank all you guys, you two guys.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. And yeah, it is mind opening. Tell you, you're I keep likening our vessels, as it might be, our bodies, to in my mind, to musical instruments. And so you were talking about, staying in bed for months at a time, and not really and that being kind of a waste of our instrument. It's when, in my mind, I was thinking, yeah, it's like a musical instrument not just laying in a dusty room and not being used, and there's no energy flowing through it, but it has, even though it has so much capability, and so much promise, if we just put it to use. And but yeah, and I guess it's because sound is so fundamental to our existence. And as you're speaking, I was taking a few notes. You were talking about how, if we practice, it gives us the confidence, and then we can meet these things with a different perspective, is what I was getting at it, rather than where something comes, this feeling starts to come over us. If we've practiced getting through it and moving on past it, then we can immediately have a different feeling about it, and that might bring us to the next step. But if we never even get out of bed to try to practice and work on it, then we'll always be meeting with that obstacle that seems so enormous, and unable to even really meet it head on, let alone meet it and then be flexible with it, but flexible with strength too. I mean, that takes the knowledge and the skills, I guess, that experiential learning that we need from actually practicing this stuff. It's also, the vibrations, how do we, you talked about, it's so easy to slip into into a depression, into that state, or into a kind of a cycle. You start thinking, if about something that's not going right. And then I remember, well, that's because of this, and then, well, this and that. And then I can get into the cycle of really beating myself up, well, okay, it's one thing to stop that. That's great. But then we're still in this state of just, of stillness, uh, becoming, even though we can still sustain and still be useful when we're not, like what Dan was saying, if you stay still and too long, you get stagnant. And then, for water, the oxygen's depleted and it can no longer sustain life. It actually needs the wind, and it needs to be mixed up, and oxygen to be mixed into it for it to really have its potential, be used to its greatest potential, I guess. So how do we learn to create the cycles of the positive cycles? I think great one to even just to start that spark within us, to start that energy within us, is the use of music, like Dan was saying, to get us going, to get us moving in the right direction and get that mental state, and then be mindful of our thoughts, as you're saying, just lying there in bed and having thoughts go through our heads, that can be destructive as well if those thoughts aren't in a positive light. So practicing the positive thoughts, or not just positive thoughts, I've found, but in that previous book that we read, I learned so much from that, and it was, and how to actually counter the negative thoughts. And then you meet the negative thoughts head on, and counter those straight up, and really dig into them, and then counter that reasoning, because usually the reasoning is false. Usually the reasoning is something you're like, that was an old thought that someone put in my mind, and it's not really. I see the errors in that thinking, and then you can talk your way through it. It's not enough just to think it; you have to talk your way through it. And I actually found, by doing that and using those examples, doing those exercises, that I became very aware of the vibrations I was creating myself from my own words. And it was almost as if I'm, you have a positive mindset, but that mindset needs to come out in a vibration through your words. And so kind of goes into the idea of, speaking your vision, or you're speaking your energies into the world, and allowing them to be, to have a life of their own as well. But how do we start that cycle? I guess music is a great way to do it. I think maybe doing some meditation. Boy, I wish Chris was here this morning. Everybody would have so many good things to say about that, I think. And ways to change our state and create that positive cycle of energy, from seemingly nothing, from being in stillness, or maybe even coming from a depressed state, flipping that around and creating a positive vibration into the world. I mean, it just seems so powerful to me, and it's a shame that we're not brought up as children to learn how to control that, how to initiate that, and even guard ourselves from those negative cycles. So that's a shame. I do see the potential in everyone around me. I mean, and that excites me. So, I'm sorry, did you have something you wanted to say, Dan?
No, I'm actually agreeing, but I've had another flood of thoughts come through, because what you were saying, how words and stuff, and how the vibrations of what words say and words do, and we're our own worst enemy when we come and say our words to ourselves, in those moments when nobody's around and stuff. And I'm going to be honest, if we're all honest, we all have those down moments. We all have those depressed moments. I think everybody gets depressed at times in our lives. At different times, it's just part of. I think it's part of the cycle of life. That's why I was using the analogy of water when it's stagnant and doesn't have anything. But the more you talked about it, I realized how when you talked about how water needs to be flowing, moving, air, the interaction and everything with everything going on around it, that's where it gets its life. And that's where I think when, laying in bed and stuff and, letting those thoughts, and that's all we focus on, then it draws us out, and we desire to be that puddle, because at that point, we can't draw in the air and the other parts and the things that we need, that water needs to keep it moving forward and stuff like that. And that's when we need others in our life and people in our lives that we can turn to, and who can infuse us and kind of, pull us in that direction, so that way that, we can start putting those right thoughts and those right words and those right vibrations back into us. And like last night, I just kind of got a little down for a little bit, and I came in my room and I was just doing my own little thing and didn't turn on the TV, but I was playing solitaire on my phone. But then I listened to a certain song I've been really resonating with a lot lately, and that kind of changed my mood. It kind of, as I, the powerfulness and what the song was saying kind of lifted me back up. And so I went to bed, and today I woke up, looking forward to getting on here and stuff, and it kind of reversed kind of where I could have gone last night. And and then realizing, okay, that's one of the things I really use music as my real catalyst for me to really be the way I really, use things. But going back to, you were talking about, we are instruments in a sense. We have to practice, living in order to live, so to speak, you know. And I've got a violin sitting in my closet that needs to have new horsehair strings so I can use it, so I can maybe start learning it again. But have I picked it up and have I practiced? Have I even remotely done that? It's not doing any good sitting there. And the beauty and something that can come out of it after time and practice, that can come out and be shared with the world, I think it just really gave me a new incentive to really want to go back and, okay, spend the money to go get the, what I need to get the bow, so that way I can use the bow and, and do what I need to do. Even if I find YouTube videos for free and try and start learning myself again, because I played as a kid and was very good, and I love it. So why not do that and bring that back out and use that as another form of something I can infuse in myself to help me when my states and my moods and stuff, because the thought of playing that would always lift me up, besides just generally listen to general music. But that would give me another avenue of building myself up in those times when I have those moments. I think, as I've learned a lot from this chapter, I've learned a lot from, how much, life is like water. If you really look at life itself, it has its flows, it has its ebbs, it has its ups and downs, it has its moments, it has its obstacles, it has its times where the water is just flowing and going full force and everything's going great, and that's what life really is. And that's what we're all about. And finding that ultimate goal and purpose is part of what we're all striving and searching for.
Well, I was thinking that's great. I was thinking, what a great way to help without helping by getting back into your music, as being an inspiration, and then putting out that positive vibration in the way of music to, and where you're you're actually helping and creating a great musical vibrations, but not going, not specifically trying to help or change anything, but just adding great positivity to the world. That's a great example. And I kept thinking, what you're saying, and we were talking about the nourishment of the waters, and we see, we get, at least for me, you come to being where we all we see is the turbulence, but we don't see the nourishment that's happening, and we just see the turbulence and feel the turbulence. So we're resistant to that because we're not realizing that it's also nourishing us, and we're not focusing on the nourishment part of it. Okay. We're a little over time here, but I do want to just really touch quickly on what he was saying, because it goes into further about how to be like water over in your life, and sort of the different states of water, the way water moves, the way water either drips or flows, and how to use that in your daily life. Says, give up interfering and helping, and opt instead to stream like water, gently, softly, and unobtrusively wherever you're needed. Like water, flow everywhere there is an opening. Rather than attempting to dominate with your forcefulness, soften your hand edges by being more tolerant of contrary opinions. Interfere less and substitute listening for directing and telling. When someone offers you their viewpoint, try responding with, "I've never considered that before. Thank you. I'll give it some thought." So really, again, just a lot to think about. At the end of each verse, he does a quick meditation. Or a suggestion about meditation. He says, do a meditation today in which you picture yourself as having the same qualities as water. Allow your soft, weak, yielding, fluid self to enter places where you previously were excluded because of your inclinations to be solid and hard. Flow softly into the lives of those with whom you feel conflicted. Picture yourself entering their private inner selves, seeing perhaps for the first time what they're experiencing. Keep this image of yourself as gently coursing water, and watch how your relationships change. So, maybe we can all think about that as we go through the next week, and, report back and let us know how it affected your life. We would love to hear your comments and suggestions, and if you're just joining us for the first time, come over and say hi to us at the Saturday morning Mastermind Mindset Mastery Collective on Facebook, and we'd be happy to hear from you. Karen, did you have any final thoughts on that? Or?
Well, thank you. Yes, I think I'll just throw out here, as I have on a number of occasions, one of the mastermind groups that I'm a part of is a Think and Grow Rich mastermind group. And, Napoleon Hill, his books, Think and Grow Rich and The Law of Success, and on and on and on and on and on, were full of practices. And like Dan, I have often kind of found myself in that state where I'm not sure I really want to, feel better, be happier, change, do anything about this, because I think as humans, I don't know, we see sometimes ourselves as, well, this is how I am, and take it or leave it, and all that kind of stuff. But as I've incorporated those practices into my life, I've had a much improved life and gained confidence, which is something that I think a lot of us lose, especially if we lose ground with our emotions through our life. And there's some habits there that we can look at and say, "Whoa, that's that's not so cool." So gaining strength, gaining self-confidence, gaining just habits of correct thinking are things that we can all do. And I I just love these masterminds. I think they're such a fabulous idea. I love this one because I feel that there's such a realness to everyone that is drawn to be a part of it. And I really encourage anybody who listens, even over time, if it's several months away from this time, join us, find us, get involved with us, be a part of us, open your mouth. Thanks. Love you guys.
Also, in my last little 2 cents worth, I liked what the meditation was talking about, because I think if we can learn to take that time and, like he was saying, kind of just look at the other perspective a little bit, let those vibrations come in a little bit, and then allow it to, for whatever worth it has, and then be fluid with that and not so rigid against how we are, like, oh, this is, like Karen was saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, take it or leave it, but learn to soften and loosen up those edges. I think that is the catalyst for change between relationships and people and things like that, and also for being that fluid, that stream of life that continues flowing on, so that way you can be um, of um, help and strength and force, but also loving, kind, and generous. The very malleable aspects of what water, teaches us, that we can carry on, going forward in life. So I think, those are things to take to heart, and just remember and learn our own vibrations, what helps affect us and keeps us to where we're up here rather than down here, and um, and knowing those times when we are starting to get there, what it takes to keep us so we can move forward and continue on and not be stagnant, like stagnant water, and kind of die off. And so with that, that's my last thoughts.
Okay, great. Yeah, don't be afraid of the turbulence. Don't be afraid to evaporate and then come back down into a new form. I guess, right? No, but that's wow. Thanks a lot, guys. That's really great ideas. And I just want to take a quick second to give a shout out to Samantha and Catherine and Sandy, who are all traveling. Safe travels, you all. There's a yeah, and thanks for joining us. We do this every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, the book we're about to finish up is Dr. Wayne Dyer, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And if you want to join us next week, we certainly invite you to. And thanks so much for joining us, and have a great weekend.